Keanu Reeves teaches him a lesson. It was a chilly evening in Los Angeles, and Sandra Bullock had just wrapped up a long day of filming. Craving something warm and comforting, she decided to stop by a quiet upscale restaurant near Beverly Hills. The dimly lit ambience and soft jazz music in the background made it the perfect place to unwind. As she entered, a few heads turned, but Sandra had always been the kind of celebrity who preferred to keep things low-key. She was led to a cozy table near the window, and moments later, Keanu Reeves strolled in, flashing his signature humble smile. They had worked together years ago, but their friendship remained strong over time. "Fancy running into you here," Keanu said, taking a seat across from her. They chatted and laughed over a couple of drinks, reminiscing about their early careers and the fun they had filming Speed. The waiter, a young man with a stiff demeanor, came over and took their orders, a simple soup and salad for Sandra and a hearty steak for Keanu. As they waited, Sandra's gaze drifted outside. Just beyond the glass, sitting on the cold sidewalk, was a little girl, no older than 10, shivering in a tattered hoodie. She held an empty paper cup in her small hands, her eyes darting at the passing pedestrians who ignored her. Sandra's heart clenched. Without hesitation, she stood up, grabbed her untouched plate of warm bread and butter and walked outside. Kneeling beside the girl, she offered the food with a gentle smile. "Here, sweetheart, have something to eat." The girl hesitated but then took the plate with wide, grateful eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Just as Sandra was about to return to her table, the waiter, who had been watching from inside, stormed out. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice laced with irritation. "You can't just give our food to beggars. This is a high-class establishment, not a charity." Sandra was taken aback by his harsh tone. "She's just a child," she responded calmly. "She was hungry." The waiter scoffed, shaking his head. "If we start handing out food to every street kid, this place will turn into a soup kitchen." Before Sandra could respond, Keanu had already stepped out. His tall frame loomed over the waiter, his expression unreadable but intense. "You know," Keanu said, his voice quiet but firm, "kindness doesn't cost anything, but being cruel, that can be expensive." The waiter frowned. "Sir, I'm just following policy." Keanu pulled out his wallet and calmly laid down a handful of crisp $100 bills in the waiter's hand. "Here's your policy change," he said. "Make sure she gets a warm meal, and while you're at it, bring her some hot chocolate." The waiter gulped, his arrogance fading. He nodded silently and hurried inside. Sandra smiled at Keanu. "You really do live up to the legend," she said playfully. He shrugged, "Just doing what's right." The little girl's eyes sparkled as she clutched her food, watching as her unexpected guardian angels returned to their seats. And that night, in a world often clouded by indifference, kindness won. Because sometimes, the best lessons aren't spoken, they're shown. What do you think? Want any changes? Sandra and Keanu continued their dinner, though their conversation now carried a different weight. They spoke about the little girl, about how unfair life could be, and how simple acts of kindness could make a difference. A few moments later, the restaurant manager, an older gentleman with a neatly pressed suit, approached their table. His expression was apologetic. "Mr. Reeves, Miss Bullock, I sincerely apologize for my waiter's behavior," he said. "That was unacceptable, and I assure you it does not reflect our values." Keanu leaned back in his chair, studying the man's face. "I appreciate that," he said, "but the real question is, what are you going to do about it?" The manager hesitated before responding. "The waiter will be spoken to, of course, but more than that, I'd like to personally make sure that little girl outside gets a meal every night she's here." Sandra's face lit up. "Really?" "Yes," the manager nodded. "We throw away a lot of food at the end of the night. Instead of wasting it, we'll set aside meals for anyone in need. If that little girl, or anyone else, comes by, they won't leave hungry." Sandra reached across the table and squeezed the manager's hand. "That's amazing, thank you," Keanu smirked. "See? Policy changes aren't that hard after all." Just then, the little girl peeked in from outside, her cheeks still red from the cold, but her eyes bright with happiness. She gave Sandra and Keanu a small wave before taking a sip of her hot chocolate. Sandra chuckled softly. "I think that's the best thank you we could get." As the night went on, word spread through the restaurant about what had happened. A few other patrons, moved by the story, chipped in to help the girl further. One offered to buy her a new coat. Another left a generous tip to be used for her future meals. By the time Sandra and Keanu left, the cold night air didn't seem as harsh anymore. They had come for a simple meal, but left having started something much bigger. Keanu, hands in his pockets, turned to Sandra as they walked toward their cars. "So, dinner next week?" Sandra grinned. "Only if we can find another waiter to teach a lesson." They laughed, and with that, the two stars went their separate ways, leaving behind a changed restaurant, a fed little girl, and a reminder that even in Hollywood, kindness is the real star. That's the continuation. Hope you liked it. Let me know if you want any edits. As Keanu and Sandra stepped outside, the cool night air brushed against them. The little girl, now wrapped in a warm coat one of the patrons had given her, stood near the restaurant entrance, clutching her hot chocolate. "Miss Sandra! Mr. Keanu!" she called out, running toward them. Sandra knelt down, smiling. "Hey there, sweetheart. Feeling a little warmer now?" The girl nodded enthusiastically. "Yes! And the food was so good, thank you!" Keanu crouched beside her. "What's your name, kiddo?" "Lily," she said shyly. Keanu exchanged a glance with Sandra. "Where are your parents, Lily?" Lily's smile faltered. She looked down, shuffling her feet. "I don't have any," she murmured. "I used to stay at a shelter, but it got too full, so I sleep outside now." Sandra felt a lump in her throat. It wasn't right. A child like her should be safe, warm, and cared for, not alone on the streets. Keanu placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "Listen, kid, we're not just going to leave you out here, okay?" Sandra nodded. "That's right. We'll figure something out." She pulled out her phone and quickly searched for a trusted children's shelter nearby. Within minutes, she found one with available space. "Lily, would you be okay if we took you somewhere safe?" Sandra asked softly. Lily's eyes widened. "Really? You mean I won't have to sleep outside anymore?" Keanu smiled. "Not tonight, not ever again, if we can help it." They called a car, and as they waited, Sandra wrapped her scarf around Lily, ensuring she stayed warm. When the car arrived, she and Keanu personally escorted Lily to the shelter. Upon arrival, they were met by a kind social worker who assured them Lily would be taken care of. As they filled out some paperwork, Lily turned to them, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "You're like angels," she whispered. Sandra chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. "Nah, just two people who care." Keanu knelt beside her. "You take care, all right? And if you ever need help, don't be afraid to ask." Lily threw her small arms around them in a tight hug. "Thank you." As Sandra and Keanu walked back to their car, the night felt different. Lighter. Brighter. Keanu smirked. "So what's next, Bullock? Saving the world one kid at a time?" Sandra laughed. "You know what, Reeves? That doesn't sound like a bad idea." And with that, they drove off, two Hollywood legends, proving that the greatest roles they could ever play weren't in movies, but in real life. That's the full story. Hope you liked it. Let me know if you want any changes or additions. A new beginning for Lily. The drive back was quiet, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. Both Sandra and Keanu were lost in thought, replaying the night's events. Keanu finally broke the silence. "You know, we could do more." Sandra glanced at him, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Keanu leaned back against the car seat. "Lily's just one kid. There are thousands more like her, alone, struggling, forgotten. We helped her tonight, but what about tomorrow? What about all the others?" Sandra nodded slowly. "I've thought about that too. We give to charities, we donate, but maybe it's time to do something bigger." Keanu turned to her with a familiar, determined glint in his eye. "What if we start something of our own? A foundation. A safe place for kids like Lily." Sandra's eyes lit up. A shelter. Not just a temporary fix, but something real. A place where kids can get education, mentorship, and a future. Keanu grinned. "Exactly." Sandra laughed softly. "Reeves, you always manage to surprise me," he smirked. "Well, you're the one who started it, giving that bread to Lily. I just followed your lead." By the time they reached Sandra's house, the idea had fully formed between them. They weren't just going to help one child, they were going to change lives. Over the next few weeks, Keanu and Sandra put their plan into motion. They reached out to contacts, pulled resources, and found an old building that could be renovated into a shelter. They called it the Haven Project, a place where no child would be turned away, where kindness and opportunity would be the foundation. Lily was their first official resident. Under their care, she thrived, enrolling in school, making friends, and for the first time in years, feeling truly safe. One evening, months later, Keanu and Sandra stood outside the Haven project, watching the sunset as children played in the yard. "We did it," Sandra whispered. Keanu smiled. "Nah, we're just getting started." And with that, two Hollywood stars became something even greater, real-life heroes. The end, or maybe just the beginning. What do you think? Would you like to expand it further?